Pakistan was not the only nation affected by severe floods in 2010. Benin also faced historic floods that covered 2/3 of the country. Although the absolute numbers were smaller because Benin is a much smaller country, in proportion to its size, the scale of the disaster was very similar to that in Pakistan. Benin received much less assistance, only about 1/20th of the aid per affected person. Yet despite this, its response has been widely praised. But then, of course, Benin is much more democratic than Pakistan. With a disastrous earthquake and tsunami having struck Japan in 2011, we are confident much the same pattern as Benin will be repeated. Japan, a democratic country, will receive massive assistance, as it should. It will use the money much more wisely than the nations affected by the 2004 tsunami. It is easy to understand why Zardari did so little to minimize the impact of the flood on the masses, and, as some have suggested, he may have deliberately made things worse. He had strong financial incentives. As the magnitude of the disaster increased, so did the amount of aid. His survival depends upon paying off the few rather than protecting the many. Aid incentivizes autocratic leaders to fail to fix problems. Had Pakistan implemented an effective flood management program, instead of just saying they had, then the people would have been much better off, but Zardari would have had no pretext to further fleece donors. Similar incentives plague Pakistani assistance with the War on Terror. Following the terrorist attacks of 2001, the United States repeatedly sought their assistance in fighting the Taliban and al-Qaeda and in capturing international terrorists, foremost of which has been Osama bin Laden, the leader of al-Qaeda, who was believed to be hiding in the tribal regions of northwestern Pakistan. Through 2008, the United States has paid Pakistan $6.5 billion in economic and military aid for its assistance. If Pakistan had captured bin Laden and prevented the Taliban from operating in northern Pakistan, then the United States would have been very grateful. But it would also no longer have needed to pay Pakistan. As with effective disaster management that limits the number of disaster victims, capturing bin Laden would have ended aid to Pakistan's leaders, as his death may do now. To understand how aid works, it is essential to take into account the incentives from the perspective of the leaders who enact policy. Unless aid is restructured to change these incentives, Pakistan has little reason to end insurgency and terrorism. Instead, both will be allowed to rumble on and encouraged to expand if the West tries to cut aid. Fortunately, in addition to identifying problematic incentives, our perspective offers the tools to restructure aid to create the incentives to fix problems.